Hi and welcome back to Broadsheet Sydney Around Town. If it's your first time watching, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a video. I'm Emma Joyce, Broadsheet's features editor, and I host this short guide to Sydney. Let's get into it. Hi, Josh. Thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
On Broadsheet Sydney Around Town. We're going to talk about your third cookbook. But before we get into that, I would like to say that when we talk about game-changing chefs or disruptors in the industry, when your name comes up, which it often does within the editorial team and discussions around having chefs who are really changing how we think about certain foods, it's with good reason.
Yeah.
When I visit places like Fish Butchery and I buy sausages made of fish, or I maybe go to Charcoal Fish and just have a fish and chips that is exactly as I expect it to be, I'm constantly thinking about the sustainability behind seafood and the fish industry generally, which I wouldn't have done in a different fish and chipper or a different type of restaurant. And this is without even talking about St. Peter or Peterman's, where you are completely redefining a fine dining cuisine or a more casual family setting.
Yeah.
And you are using the whole fish as much as possible. Can we talk a little bit about what it is that motivates you the most in your day-to-day when you are preparing fish, cooking, and designing menus?
The initial motivation came from fear of failure. I think when we opened St. Peter, it was just Julie, my wife, and I that opened St. Peter ourselves. And I think ever since, the freedom to make our own decisions has been a motivation, and to make sure that we can make a sustainable business for not just our team and the fish that we purchase and all those sorts of things, but sustainable for our own lives, that we aren't, I suppose, at the mercy of a partner or investors. And we've been able to be very fortunate to continue on a path of independence. And I think that's a real motivation, that we do the right thing with how we handle the product. So initially, it was if I get this wrong, then the onus of that lies on my shoulders. And so creativity and innovation was born about from the idea that I had a problem, which was that I selected one of the most difficult proteins to work with as a cook. And one of the most expensive. So I mean, expensive from how much a fish costs through to how laborious it is. So really, St. Peter went off on a path and found its lane within working with fish in a more holistic way, because it didn't make any sense to throw half the fish in the bin. And I think I've said it before. It's $4,500 for my first ever bill for fish that I paid, not for vegetables and dry store and things. It was $4,500 just for fish to turn the lights on at St. Peter. And you work out the maths of what you're educated in a college setting, in a TAFE setting. It's, you get told that 45% is the yield, and the remainder is deemed as loss. And that to me was economically not viable and ethically incorrect. And there's only so much fish stock we kind of need as well. So it was really to turn our attention creatively to that as a group. And I was very spoilt to be working with some quite extraordinary chefs at the time, in Alana Sapwell and Eilish Maloney and Tristan Rebbits and all these great chefs that have come along at St. Peter. And we put our heads together and we came up with a whole lot of creative ways to bring desirability to some fairly texturally compromised and aesthetically challenging parts of the fish. And the first one was making almost like a prawn cracker out of an eye. And then we went on and made, black pudding out of the fish blood. And, we were using fish sperm and fish roe and hearts and livers and things. And we had a great time. It does make sense to be trying to aspire to this holy grail of, lowering your food cost and then juggling how much labor you need to do that. But, finally now with Peterman open, with Charcoal Fish and the fish butcheries in St. Peter, there's home for all of these different parts of the fish, which captures the appropriate amount of margin in each venue. And I don't think we talk enough about the economics behind business in general, and especially with fish. So motivation lies within endless creative opportunity just seeing a fish more as meat and drawing down upon the centuries of knowledge we have around how a butcher works and applying those practices to the world of fish.
Let's talk about your previous two cookbooks, because the Whole Fish Cookbook was presented the James Beard Book of the Year Award in 2020. That's a huge accolade internationally. And then your second cookbook, Take One Fish, had 15 different fish species that we might not be familiar with or wanted to introduce in a way that would feel like something that we could work with at home.
Yeah.
And then now your third cookbook, you've mentioned that it's leaning towards the industry as much as for people at home. And you've got all of these different expert tips and techniques that you're sharing with people. Can you tell me what even is a reverse butterfly?
No, I mean, I'm trying to put names to things perhaps that haven't had names put to them before. And so I see it as a loose reference point for where to begin, where the knife sits. But a lot of those cuts within the book, yes, they are, I suppose, leaning into the industry, but also to the adventurous home cook that really does have probably, a more diverse range of knives than I personally do, and are just really interested and excited. And I, this book, as much as I say it's for the industry, it is for the home cook as well, to recognize the true labor and skill involved in what this all looks like, and not just the skill within the work that we do within our venues, but within how a fish is caught. We've broken the book up into 3 sections: catch, cut, and craft. And within catch, I've managed to take the voice of a modern fishmonger in a good friend of mine, Tony. He's, relatively young guy, and he's been doing this for a really long time. And I wanted him to explain, I suppose, the details within being, I suppose, employed as a fishmonger, and what that title even looks like, and what the responsibilities are that he has. And then speaking to Darren O'Rourke at Vic's Meats, the head butcher there, and actually getting context from a meat butcher about what his job is and what the recovery rate looks like per animal. And then speaking to a fisherman in Luke Beschultz up at Nautical Seafood, and getting him to give clarity and context around how his decisions to catch a fish one at a time and practice the ethics that he does, how much that costs, and what are all the costs associated with it, so that then that translates into an understanding of value, and gives context to the fish sitting beneath the plastic at Woolworths or Coles that we see and we consume, but lack, I suppose, awareness in terms of how it even got there, and showcasing how a fish is caught and then killed and then transported to the market. And I think that's important, and it's not something that we see too frequently in books. And I'm very, I suppose, grateful that Hardy Grant, the publishers, put their hand up and trusted what we've gone and put into this one.
So your third cookbook, Fish Butchery, Mastering the Catch, Cut and Craft by Josh Niland, is out right now.
Yes,
today. So people can buy it. Yes, excellent. And you've also got 40 recipes in there, and they're 4 things that sound reasonable: fish sticks, pies, but also things that maybe are unusual to have seafood within. So like cured meats, like a chorizo, or you've got a tuna mincemeat pie, for example. What is the item or the recipe in there that you think people would be interested to hear as being maybe one of the most creative that you've come up with?
Goodness. I think the salamis and the mortadellas and things like that are quite abstract in their placing fish in amongst that catalogue of charcuterie and salumi that we've become so synonymous with meat. But I mean, those, I suppose, recipes have been crafted in a way that utilize fish that was left over. That was the whole catalyst for why we even made them in the first place. I mean, in the very beginning, I was very stubborn around not wanting to purchase fish to produce what those products were. It was waiting until you accumulated enough to then produce it. And even then further into the book, in a very abstract sense, the recipes in there that don't actually involve consuming it at the end. It's turning fish bones into plates and turning fish fat into soap and candles. and then working with Matt Wiley to produce, cocktails using the waste from a fish as well. And to include all the voices from these people into the book, I think is quite encouraging for the industry and for home cooks as well, to see that there is more diverse opportunity that lies within a fish, and it doesn't always have to end up on the plate. It can actually be the plate.
You also work with lots of other businesses around Sydney. So Hunter Candles is a great one for using the fat of a Murray cod for creating a candle, and you collaborate on an ice cream.
Yeah, with Chichione.
Using the fat of the Murray cod as well.
Yeah.
Do you have circumstances where you don't have enough of that particular product?
We find ourselves in a state of that at the moment. I mean, when you're able to kind of generate all these recipes and you're excited and people are very excited to try it, it almost feels like when we first opened St. Peter, when we started uncovering all these things, we were only one restaurant that served 34 guests at a time. And it got to the point where we were doing 75, 80 people in a service, and everybody came to try the secondaries or the sundries of a fish. And so what happened was the sundries started to exceed the sales of the primary cuts, and that's quite challenging. It's exciting that there was a captive market there and an audience that still craves consuming something they've never had before. But we needed to open Fish Butchery Paddington to be able to accommodate guests having that experience within St. Peter. And like I said, that's now why we've got this quite a nice circle where primary cuts go down to charcoal fish on the barbecue. They go across to Peterman so that people can have a beautiful Chateaubriand of tuna with chips and pepper sauce and have a bit of fun with that. And then back at St. Peter, we can give people a salami of yellowfin tuna, and we can age fish for an extended period of time to give them an experience that feels more like meat. And all of this, yes, there's cool factor to it, I suppose, if that sounds a bit ugly, but like there's an aspect to it that is...
There's novelty, for sure.
There's novelty and there's marketability within parts of the work that we do, but all of it to create nostalgic feelings towards feeling comfortable with the meal that you're eating. And it's to remove all the discomfort and all the friction that lies within fish, because we can all remember the fish shop that we couldn't see, but we could smell. And then when we did get in there, then, we're trudging through water and it all feels a little bit too cold and it doesn't have a feeling of comfort by any means. So we're priority is to make things delicious. And then secondary to that is to really make people feel comfortable and enjoy the experience, because we're very fortunate in Australia to have such beautiful produce.
We sure are. One of the experiences that you also offer, which we haven't mentioned, is an at-home dining situation, or you sell products within the Fish Butchery that you can take home and cook for yourselves. One of the ones that we frequently have is the lasagna, and it's interesting because it doesn't necessarily taste like it's a beef lasagna or something like that. It has the fishiness come through. So you have successfully shifted the way that I might think about that particular food item. Are there any meals that you're working on or you've got ideas for, but you haven't quite found the right way to do it yet?
The idea of utilizing the sundries of a fish within the setting of Fish Butchery, and I wouldn't say domesticating it, but making it approachable for a family to take home with them, has all been born out of the idea that to walk into Fish Butchery, I'll say this very, honestly, fish is really expensive. And to look at the cost of, a loin of tuna that's been cylindrically carved out of the middle of the loin, that's sitting anywhere in the hundreds of dollars a kilo. You can think about going into a great butchery and paying a fortune for a grain-fed or a wagyu or something. Tuna carries that same reverence. And, that ostracizes a big percentage of the market. And unfortunately, a few kids can sit down to a center cut of tuna. And what we're trying to do is say that, like an animal, there are primary cuts and secondary cuts, and we're going to take the secondaries out on day one and then put them to work straight away. So we're going to take the really tough, sinewy cuts of the tail, as we show in Fish Butchery book. We're gonna look at it as if it's oxtail. We're gonna potentially braise it down. We're gonna pick it. We're gonna put it into a meat pie, or then we're gonna take the really heavy, dark lateral muscle out of the fish that usually always gets pushed aside, and we're gonna grind that down, and we're gonna make a ragu. We're gonna make bolognese, which, like you said, a beautiful lasagna, and that way then it becomes something that we can consume on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and it doesn't feel like a fancy fish dinner. It's just a yummy lasagna, and the kids get their omega-3s. Everybody has a little bit of a giggle later on when they say, well, that was actually tuna. And, even my kids, giving them a tuna cheeseburger and them still resolute that charcoal fish serves a beef burger just for her, just because there's not always the desire to eat fish when we go for takeaway. But these things are meant to be fun, and they're meant to encourage, I suppose, a larger audience than just us here in Sydney, and then not only just here in Australia. It's to suggest that there's marketplaces all over the world that are wrestling with tons and tons of waste, and some waste that doesn't even go to market. There's something that got said that half the fish that gets caught goes to waste even before it goes to market. And then you can only appreciate then that the fish that does arrive to market, then if we're only going to see half of it as being valuable, then you're forever working in this constant state of subtraction that's, detrimental to us interacting with wild fish in the future. And I think for my children and their children, I think that's a real shame. And it's grossly privileged to look at, that we can say that we only want the 8 centimeters out of the middle of something, whether it's fish or meat or a carrot. I mean, if you buy something, it's yours. Put it to work, and you'll probably find a greater love and appreciation for cooking and for hospitality, and an appreciation for where your food is from and how much you invest in it.
Can I talk about your international renown? I know that you want to sigh at that one, but you were the first Australian to win the James Beard Book of the Year award, which is for your first cookbook, the Whole Fish Cookbook. Has having conversations with people overseas changed anything that you're aware of? Have you heard of different practices happening in other countries that you think that we should know about?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a cohort of people aging fish in America now, which is, it's exciting. It's great, and I feel having the opportunity to travel with the Whole Fish Cookbook was a really wonderful experience for me, and being welcomed with open arms into the likes of Blue Hill with Dan Barber and Grant Achatz at Alinea, and even Chad Robinson at Tartine, and being, I suppose, allowed the opportunity to do a little masterclass for their team and explain the theory behind the work, like you're doing with me right now. It's I suppose sharing all this is the important thing, and it's to know it, and then how you want to use it, it's up to you. And I mean, even if you think about 5% of what we're talking about and just start to use one more part of the fish than you were yesterday, then I suppose that's a good thing to happen. But, to see fish getting aged in America, and even a new modern style fish shop opening in the UK, specifically in London, we've seen quite a few different shops open and looking to utilize the whole fish rather than just the fillets. And for me, seeing the, I suppose, enthusiasm and excitement around the first book when I was traveling and things, and even via social media, chefs sharing with you what they've done or how they've interpreted a recipe that I've done. And I think seeing that, sometimes I felt negatively about it, because I don't think they started with the premise of, I'm doing this because I want more from one fish, or I want this delicious outcome, or whatever it might be. Like, it wasn't starting from a place of solving a problem. It was starting from a place of, I want the end result on my menu all the time, and I'm going to buy specifically this organ or this cut of fish so that I can replicate this and repeat it over and over and see it as a business, which it is. But it's more, I suppose I needed to clarify the work that we were doing, and I suppose the practices that we've finally got into a good flow now with at Fish Butchery, and I wanted to polish, I suppose, what the whole fish looked like in the form of this new book, Fish Butchery, just to make sure that I wasn't speaking with any grey area, and I could actually, I suppose, advance the main reason for why I'm doing all this in the first place. And I think a lot of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I was given a very wonderful education by Stephen Hodges specifically, who before him got given a great education by Greg Doyle. And then, at a similar time, you've got people like Neil Perry, you've got John Sussman, you've got all these, I suppose, Australian fish icons that carved a path of dry handling, going direct to fishermen, raising the standards of what Australian cuisine kind of looks like. And to be loosely a part of that lineage, I think that was an opportunity in and of itself. And I felt, given that Steve had invested so much time in me and my education, then I didn't want to, I suppose, throw up the middle finger and do something differently and go and do meat or go and do something that didn't carry, I suppose, the value of the information that he'd given me. So, yeah, that was why I suppose we ended up choosing fish. It was because I was fascinated by how difficult it was, and I thought it could be, better, just because I hadn't seen it evolve past fillets and whole for a very long time.
Well, you've become synonymous with this fin to scale philosophy, with using the whole fish. That's partly why that title came about. And also this creative approach to how we can use what we might have thought of as being waste.
Yeah.
So I had an excellent time talking to you.
Oh,
thanks so much for coming in. If anyone is listening and feels inspired to kind of create things at home, or just wants to check out the new cookbook, Fish Butchery, Mastering the Catch, Cut and Craft by Josh Niland, is available now from Hardy Grant. Thank you so much, John. And that's all we have time for today. As always, you can keep up to date with what's happening around Sydney at broadsheet.com.au and at broadsheet_Sid on Instagram. I'll be back next week. Chat then.